The gavel hadn't even come down yet when the doors of the Parker Medical Group boardroom flew open. 12 executives froze mid-breath. Coffee cups hovered. A pen rolled off the polished mahogany table, and nobody moved to catch it. Attorney Diane Ferris stood at the head of the room, a single sheet of paper trembling, just slightly, in her hand. She had read wills for 30 years. She had never once seen a room go this silent. "The new heir to Parker Medical Group," she said, "is—" The doors didn't wait for her to finish. They swung open on their own weight, and every head in that room turned as one. Samuel Parker stood in the doorway, tall, composed, wearing a gray suit that fit like it had been made for exactly this moment, though it hadn't. He'd bought it 2 days ago with the last of his savings, unsure if he'd even be allowed inside the building. 20 years. 20 years since anyone in that room had said his name out loud. His older sister, Renee Parker Combs, rose halfway out of her chair, her mouth open, no sound coming out. Beside her, his younger brother Marcus gripped the table edge so hard his knuckles went white. And at the far end, in the seat that used to belong to their father, sat their uncle and acting CEO, Walter Parker, the only person in the room who didn't look surprised at all. That, more than anything, was what Samuel noticed first. They threw him away when he was 23 years old, accused him of something he didn't do, erased him from every family photo, every company newsletter, every conversation at Thanksgiving. And now, 20 years later, they couldn't stop him from walking back through that door and taking everything. The room held its breath. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Nobody in that boardroom said a word. Diane Ferris cleared her throat, folded the will closed without finishing the sentence, and looked between Samuel and the family he hadn't spoken to in 2 decades. "I think," she said carefully, "we should start from the beginning. Because to understand why Dr. Ezekiel Parker, founder of Parker Medical Group, the largest black-owned network of private hospitals on the East Coast, had chosen his disgraced, disowned son as sole heir over his 2 other children, you had to go back. Back to who Samuel really was before the accusation. Back to what actually happened the night everything fell apart. Back to the one question that had haunted this family for 20 years, and that not one of them, not Renee, not Marcus, not even Walter, had ever really answered honestly. Who set Samuel Parker up? And why did Ezekiel know the truth the entire time and say nothing until now? The answers were sitting in a locked drawer in Ezekiel's old office, in a box nobody had opened since his funeral 3 weeks earlier. And they were about to change everything. 23 years ago, Samuel Parker was the golden child. Not because anyone favored him. Ezekiel Parker made a point of treating his 3 children equally, sometimes brutally so, but because Samuel had earned it the hard way. Valedictorian. Full scholarship to Howard University's pre-med program. The first Parker in 3 generations to want to become a doctor instead of a hospital administrator. His father used to bring him to the flagship hospital on Saturday mornings, walking the halls together before the building woke up. One day, Sam, Ezekiel would say, resting a hand on his son's shoulder, "This whole thing runs on trust. Patients trust us with their lives. Staff trust us with their livelihoods. You lose that trust one time, and it takes 20 years to earn it back." Samuel didn't know yet how prophetic those words would become. His sister Renee was 3 years older, sharp as a scalpel, already running finance for 2 of the satellite clinics by the time she was 26. She loved Samuel the way older sisters do, fiercely, but with an edge of competition she'd never fully admit to. Their younger brother Marcus was the baby of the family, charming, a little lost, always chasing their father's approval in ways that never quite landed. And then there was Walter, Ezekiel's younger brother, the company's chief financial officer, the uncle who taught Samuel how to tie a tie for his first job interview. Walter who came to every birthday. Walter who Samuel trusted completely. Samuel had just finished his residency and stepped into a junior operations role at Parker Medical Group's flagship campus, learning the business side his father always said mattered as much as the medicine. He was engaged to Danielle Osei, a nurse he'd met during his rotations, a woman with a laugh that filled up whatever room she walked into. Ezekiel adored her. "She keeps you honest," he told Samuel once. "Marry a woman who keeps you honest." Life was warm, full, the kind of full that, looking back, Samuel would realize was the calm sitting right on top of storm. Because 2 months before his 24th birthday, $4 million went missing from a restricted equipment procurement account. And every falsified document, every forged signature, every digital trail pointed directly at Samuel. The accusation landed like a bomb. Ezekiel called an emergency board meeting. Samuel remembered walking into that same boardroom, younger then, terrified, still in his hospital scrubs because he'd come straight from a shift, and seeing his own father's face already hardened into something he'd never seen before. "Explain this," Ezekiel said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were wire transfer records with Samuel's login credentials. Purchase orders with a signature that looked almost exactly like his. "I didn't do this," Samuel said. "Dad, I didn't do this." Walter spoke up first, and Samuel remembered being grateful for it, thinking his uncle was about to defend him. "The system logs don't lie, Zeke," Walter said instead, quietly, almost gently, which somehow made it worse. "I hate this as much as anyone, but the logs don't lie." Renee stayed silent, staring at the table. Marcus wouldn't even look up. Samuel begged his father to bring in an independent forensic auditor, someone outside the company, someone who owed the family nothing. Ezekiel refused. Not out of cruelty. Samuel would only understand this years later, but because at the time, doing so publicly would have meant admitting to the hospital board and to federal regulators that Parker Medical Group's internal financial controls could be quietly compromised, and Ezekiel was terrified that admission alone could tank confidence in a hospital network that served 40,000 patients a year. He chose to contain it instead of expose it, and containing it meant Samuel had to go. "I can't have this attached to the company," Ezekiel told him, and his voice cracked on the word company, though Samuel was too devastated at the time to hear it. "You're done here, Samuel. And until I know the truth, you're done being my son, too." Danielle stood by him through the initial weeks, the police interviews, the humiliating silence that fell over every family gathering he was no longer invited to. But when the story leaked to a local business journal, someone inside the company had made sure of that, and Samuel's name became attached to embezzlement in a permanent, searchable way. The wedding invitations quietly stopped going out. Her parents asked her to reconsider. 6 months later, she was gone too. Samuel Parker left Baltimore with 2 suitcases, a bank account with $400 in it, and a hole in his chest that never fully closed. He didn't come back for 8 years. Not because he didn't want to, because he had nothing to come back with. No name that wasn't stained. No proof. No money. Just a criminal record that never actually resulted in charges. The DA's office quietly declined to prosecute after 18 months, citing insufficient evidence, but the damage to his name was already permanent, unretractable, the kind of thing Google remembers forever even when the justice system moves on. He worked construction in Charlotte for a year, sleeping in his car more nights than he'd ever admit to anyone. He got a job as a hospital orderly in Atlanta under his mother's maiden name, Adeyemi, mopping the same kind of floors he used to walk as an executive in training. Nobody there knew who he used to be. There was a strange piece in that. It was a nurse named Grace Odom who noticed him first, not romantically, but the way a good mentor notices talent hiding under grief. She caught him quietly reorganizing a broken supply chain workflow on his own time, just because the inefficiency bothered him. "You've done this kind of work before," she said. It wasn't a question. He told her the truth. All of it. She was the first person in 8 years he told the whole story to. "Then stop mopping floors and go build something that's yours," she said. "Nobody can take away what they didn't give you in the first place." With Grace's help and a small loan, he paid back within a year. Samuel, now going by Samuel Adeyemi professionally, using his mother's name to escape the shadow of his own, started a healthcare logistics consulting firm, helping small regional hospitals fix the exact kind of operational chaos that had once nearly destroyed his family's company. He was good at it. Better than good. He understood hospitals from the inside in a way most consultants never would. By year 3, Adeyemi Health Solutions had 11 employees and contracts with 14 hospital systems across the Southeast. By year 6, 40 employees, contracts in 9 states. He never used the Parker name once. He built it all from absolute zero, brick by brick, failure by failure, and every small win felt like proof that his father had been wrong about him. He still thought about Ezekiel every single day. He never called. Back in Baltimore, Parker Medical Group was not doing well. Ezekiel Parker, now in his 70s, had slowly handed the reins to Renee as president of operations and Walter as CFO, with Marcus overseeing community outreach and public relations. A role everyone privately understood was more ceremonial than functional. Renee ran the company with precision but not warmth, and staff turnover crept steadily upward. Walter, meanwhile, had spent a decade quietly making decisions that looked reasonable individually but added up to something troubling. Aggressive real estate expansion funded by increasingly risky debt, a joint venture with a private equity firm that took a bigger and bigger bite of profits every year, and buried in filings nobody outside of finance ever read closely, a pattern of moving money through accounts that mirrored, almost exactly, the kind of structure that had once been used to frame Samuel. Marcus suspected something was wrong for years, but never had the courage or the financial literacy to prove it. He drank more than he used to. He avoided Walter at family functions in ways that seemed, in hindsight, less like tension and more like guilt. Then came the lawsuit. A former employee, a billing coordinator named Heir, filed a whistleblower complaint alleging that Parker Medical Group had been submitting inflated insurance claims for 2 years. Federal investigators opened an inquiry. 2 major hospital contracts were suspended pending review. The company's line of credit, already stretched thin from Walter's expansion debt, was suddenly at risk of being called in entirely. Ezekiel, watching all of this from his sickbed, a heart condition had been slowing him down for 2 years by then, finally did what he had refused to do 20 years earlier. He hired an independent forensic auditing team. Not to investigate Samuel this time, to investigate everyone. The auditors worked quietly for 4 months. What they found, delivered to Ezekiel 3 weeks before he passed away in his sleep, was a 500-page report that confirmed something Ezekiel had suspected, and privately, shamefully, chosen not to look at closely for nearly 2 decades. The $4 million that vanished 20 years ago had never touched Samuel's accounts at all. The digital trail had been meticulously constructed to look like it had, using a security vulnerability in the company's old procurement system. A vulnerability that only 3 people had the technical access and authority to exploit. Samuel wasn't one of them. Walter was. The money had funded a separate shell entity, one that later quietly became a seed investor in Walter's first private real estate venture outside the company, the same venture that 20 years later had grown into the risky expansion debt now threatening to sink Parker Medical Group entirely. Walter hadn't just framed his nephew. He had used the very money he stole to build a second, secret financial life, one he'd been protecting and expanding for 2 decades, using Samuel as the permanent scapegoat that made sure nobody ever looked twice. Ezekiel sat with that report for 6 days before he told anyone. His health was already failing. He called his lawyer, Diane Ferris, and made one final change to his will, a change he asked her to keep sealed until his reading. He tried in his final weeks to reach Samuel directly. He left 3 voicemails that Samuel, still guarding his heart after 20 years of silence, didn't listen to until after the funeral, when it was already too late to hear his father's voice one more time. The last voicemail, the one Samuel finally played alone in his car outside the funeral home, said this: "Samuel, it's Dad. I was wrong. I was wrong 20 years ago, and I've been wrong every year since that I didn't fix it. I know what really happened. I know who did this to you. I need you to come home, not for the company. For me. Please, son. Please call me back." Samuel sat in that car for 40 minutes before he could drive. Which brings us back to the boardroom. Diane Ferris resumed reading the will, and this time, nobody interrupted her. I, Ezekiel Parker, being of sound mind, named Samuel Adeyemi Parker as sole heir and controlling shareholder of Parker Medical Group, effective immediately upon my death. This decision is not made lightly, nor is it made without full knowledge of the truth I failed to act on for 20 years. Renee's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus finally looked up, and for the first time in 2 decades, looked his older brother directly in the eye, not with resentment, but with something that looked almost like relief, like a weight he'd carried for years had finally, mercifully, been set down. Walter did not react at all, and that, Samuel would think later, was the most damning thing of all. There's an addendum, Diane continued, her voice steadier now. A forensic report commissioned by Ezekiel Parker 4 months before his death is to be entered into the company's official records and shared with the board of directors and, if necessary, with federal investigators currently reviewing Parker Medical Group's finances. Every eye in the room turned to Walter. "This is absurd," Walter said, standing so fast his chair rolled backward into wall. Zeke was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly at the end. "You cannot seriously be entertaining." "The report is dated and notarized, Walter," Diane said quietly. "It was reviewed by 3 independent forensic accountants. It's not a matter of entertainment. It's a matter of record." For the first time in 20 years, Samuel spoke. "Sit down, Uncle Walter." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was the voice of a man who had spent 8 years building something from nothing and no longer needed to raise his voice to be heard. The whole room felt it. Renee actually flinched. Walter sat down slowly, and for the first time, Samuel saw something in his uncle's face he'd never seen before. Fear. If you were in Samuel's position right now, 20 years of stolen time, a family that let you fall, and the power to finally do something about it, would you choose revenge, or would you choose to walk away with your integrity intact? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you're feeling this story so far. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Samuel's professional life, and strangely, some of the most clarifying. He didn't fire Walter immediately. He didn't call the press. He didn't do any of the things a wounded 23-year-old version of himself might have fantasized about doing during those long, cold nights sleeping in his car in Charlotte. Instead, he called an emergency meeting with the full board, Diane Ferris beside him, and laid the forensic report on the table for everyone to see. Line by line, account by account, 20 years of buried truth, finally in daylight. "I'm not here to burn this company down," Samuel told the room. "My father built this to serve people who look like us, in communities that other hospital systems overlooked for decades. 40,000 patients a year trust Parker Medical Group with their lives. I'm not going to let anyone's mistakes, including mine, including my own 8 years of silence, cost them that." Renee, to her credit, was the first to speak after him. "I should have fought harder for you 20 years ago," she said, her voice breaking. "I was scared of Dad. I was scared of losing my place here. I let that fear cost me my brother. I'm sorry, Samuel. I know sorry doesn't buy back 20 years. Marcus, quieter, added only, "I suspected Walter for years. I never had the courage to say it out loud. That's on me too." Walter, for his part, hired a lawyer within 48 hours and resigned from the board the same week, a move that surprised no one and satisfied almost nobody. The federal investigation, already underway because of Priya Nair's whistleblower complaint, expanded to include the newly surfaced forensic report. Whether Walter would ultimately face criminal charges was now a matter for prosecutors, not for Samuel to decide alone, and Samuel deliberately let the legal system take that weight off his shoulders rather than carrying it himself. Justice, real justice, didn't need him to be the one swinging the axe. It just needed him to stop protecting the people who'd been swinging it at him for 20 years. The most intense part of this story is that Samuel had every legal right, every emotional justification, to destroy his family publicly and walk away rich and vindicated. Instead, he chose something much harder. If this is hitting you the way it's hitting us, smash that like button right now and drop a comment telling us what you would have done in his shoes. We read every single one. 6 months later, Parker Medical Group looked different, not unrecognizable, but healthier. Samuel restructured the leadership team, keeping Renee as president of operations because, whatever her past silence, she was genuinely excellent at the job, and giving her the support and independent oversight she'd never had under Walter's shadow. Marcus, surprising everyone including himself, asked to step back from public relations and instead trained to become a licensed hospital administrator, saying he wanted to actually earn a title instead of inheriting one. Samuel didn't move back into his father's old office right away. For the first few months, he worked from a smaller room down the hall, Grace Odom's old advice about not needing to be given what he could build himself still living somewhere in the back of his mind. When he finally did sit behind his father's desk, it wasn't as a triumphant return. It was quiet. Him alone, the framed photo of him, and his father walking hospital halls on a Saturday morning, dusted off and set back on the shelf where it belonged. He reached out to Danielle once, not to reopen an old wound, but because he'd heard through mutual friends that she'd become a nurse practitioner, and after everything, he wanted her to know he didn't blame her for leaving. She wrote back a single line, "I always knew the truth would catch up. I'm glad it caught up to something good." They didn't reconnect romantically. Some doors, once closed, are better left as good memories than reopened chapters, and Samuel found he was at peace with that. He kept Grace Odom on retainer as a leadership consultant for the company. It felt right, bringing the person who saved him back to the place that had almost destroyed him. As for Walter, Samuel made one final decision that surprised the whole board. He didn't push for the maximum possible legal consequence. He let the investigators and prosecutors do their jobs independently, without interference either way, and he quietly ensured Walter's wife and children, who'd had no part in any of it, weren't financially destroyed by whatever came next. "My father spent 20 years choosing containment over truth," Samuel said when Renee asked him why. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life choosing revenge over peace. Those are different mistakes, but they're still mistakes. A family can take away your name. They can take away 20 years, a wedding, a future you thought you were owed. But they cannot take away your character. And in the end, that was the one thing nobody in that boardroom could have inherited, stolen, or given back to Samuel Parker. He built it himself, alone, in the years nobody was watching. If you were in his position, would you have chosen revenge, or would you have chosen what Samuel chose? Tell us in the comments below. We genuinely want to know. And if this story moved you even a little, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. We've got more stories just like this one coming your way, every single week. Thank you for watching until the very end. We'll see you in the next story.